If there's one thing some Christians love, it's a good doomsday prophecy. Let's talk the end of the world. Hi Internet, my name is Jeff and I'm a pastor, and about a year ago I taught a Bible study about different verses that people point to when they're talking about the end of the world, or different passages that people will point to and they'll say, see, the Bible predicts the end of the world or talks about the end of the world. And these sorts of predictions, doomsday predictions, discussions about how the Bible talks about the end of the world, they're actually very popular. Not too long ago, I got this CD in the mail. It is called The Mark of the Beast, The Antichrist and Bill Gates. Of course, I listened to it. Basically, it talks about how the end of the world is coming and everyone will receive the mark of the beast that's foretold in the book of Revelation. And this individual who was preaching this sermon was, of course, making a big deal about the fact that the Greek word for crown is corona. And the word crown is used in the book of Revelation. I didn't really follow the logic too much. But anyway, one time I was visiting some friends in New York City, and this was about 10 years ago. We were getting on the subway and someone handed me this pamphlet. It is Holy God Will Bring Judgment Day on May 21st, 2011. Do you remember that? When the world was supposed to end on May 21st, 2011? I remember that. I threw a party. We threw an end of the world party. It was fun. I made a mix. All songs about the end of the world. It was great. Okay, but anyway, a lot of people will talk about how there are certain parts of the Bible that talk about the end of the world and how we need to get ready for the world to end. And so what I'd like to do over the next couple of videos is talk about the different verses or the different passages in scripture that people point to when they're talking about the end of the world, or when they're trying to convince you that the world is about to end and the Bible predicts it. And to start off this week, we are going to talk about the prophets in the Old Testament. A couple of things about prophets. First of all, the prophets aren't necessarily people who predict the future. When you hear that word prophet in the Bible, instead a prophet was somebody who was more like a preacher. They didn't tell the future, they told the present. Or the way that somebody put it to me one time, one of my professors when I was in college, the prophets weren't foretellers, they were forthtellers. They were people who preached about the present. Did they talk about the future? Yes, they did talk about the future. But they talked about the future in terms of the present. In other words, they would talk about the things that people were doing in the present, and then they would say, and if we keep going down this road, these are the things that are going to happen to us. So, in a sense, they did talk about the future, but only in terms of the present in order to change people's present behavior. So that's the first thing about prophets. The prophets weren't foretellers, they were forthtellers. They were preachers. Now, the second thing that I want to mention with regards to the prophets is that they use this phrase a lot, and the phrase is the day of the Lord. And I want to talk about this phrase in particular because this is one that a lot of people will point to and they'll say, that's doomsday. The day of the Lord is doomsday. That's when the end of the world is going to happen. And so if we dig into the prophets and see how they talk about the day of the Lord, then maybe we can learn something about the end of the world. But let's give a little bit of context to these sermons that the prophets were preaching. They were preaching to the people of ancient Israel. Now, an important thing to remember about the people of ancient Israel is that they were slaves in Egypt for generations and generations and generations. And the defining story for the people of ancient Israel was that they were once slaves in Egypt, but then God freed them using a guy named Moses. So the nation of Israel is a nation of former slaves. And so when they were actually developing into a nation, you find that they have all sorts of laws that keep this in their memory. Things like laws about protecting slaves or freeing slaves every 7 years and masters being required to furnish the slaves after their freedom. You also find things like Sabbath laws, that even slaves should be keeping some sort of Sabbath rest. Or you find laws about the treatment of foreign slaves. So all of these rules are there basically to remind the people of Israel, look, you were once slaves. And in fact, that's a refrain that you find throughout the law. God says, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. This is a group of people who are freed slaves, and they're trying to keep this at the forefront of their memory. But of course, over time, the people forgot this history. They forgot this reality. And so eventually you find a king over the people of Israel named Solomon. Let me read a couple of things about Solomon here. This is from 2 Chronicles. Solomon gathered together chariots and horses. He had 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horses, which he stationed in the chariot cities with the king of Jerusalem. The king made silver and gold as common in Jerusalem as stone, and he made cedar as plentiful as the sycamore of Shephelah. Solomon's horses were imported from Egypt and Kue. From Egypt and Kue. The king's traders received them from Kue at the prevailing price. They imported from Egypt, then exported a chariot for 600 shekels of silver and a horse for 150. So through them, these were exported to all the kings of the Hittites and the kings of Aram. So basically what you have going on here is that you have this nation of former slaves that were supposed to be a nation that wasn't going to exploit other nations, and you find that they are essentially arms dealers. They're dealing chariots and horses, buying them from one nation to another nation. Apparently this nation has also become exceedingly wealthy. I mean, let's go back to that one verse about the king made silver and gold as common in Jerusalem as stone. So let's read some more things about Solomon. Here's a verse from 1 Kings. It says, among Solomon's wives were 700 princesses and 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. So this is a guy who's the king of the nation of former slaves, and apparently he has a harem of more than 1,000 women. And another thing that you find in 1 Kings, in 1 Kings chapter 9, you can read it yourself, 1 Kings 9, 15 to 25, Solomon eventually decided that he was going to build a temple for God, you know, the God who freed the people from slavery. And get this, to build this temple, he used slave labor. Slave labor to build a temple to the God who freed the people of Israel from slavery. So you can see that something has gone wrong here. The people have lost the plot. And this is where the prophets come in. The prophets come in to remind the people of the plot, to remind the people that once they were slaves in Egypt and they need to get their act together. And this is when they started talking about the day of the Lord. So let's use this one prophet. This is a guy named Amos. You'll find him in the Old Testament. Amos, in his sermon in chapter 5, verse 18, you find that he says this, "Alas for you who desire the day of the Lord. Why do you want the day of the Lord? It is darkness, not light. As if someone fled from a lion and was met by a bear, or went into the house and rested a hand against the wall and was bitten by a snake. Is not the day of the Lord darkness, not light, with gloom, with no brightness in it?" Now, on one hand, you can look at this and you can say, oh yeah, there's this coming day of the Lord, it's going to be a judgment day. But maybe what Amos is doing is talking to the ancient Israelites in their present time and basically saying, look, you have lost the plot. You used to be people who desired the day of the Lord for good reasons because the day of the Lord meant justice. But guess what? You are no longer on the side of justice. Instead, you are a group of people who are exploiting the poor who are right there in the middle of you and exploiting slaves. You were once a nation of freed slaves, and now you're a nation that enslaves other people. So the day of the Lord that you used to long for because it's a day of justice, well, watch out, because you are no longer on the side of justice. So look, it could be that the day of the Lord is this coming doomsday, this coming judgment day, a fixed day in the mind of God, and everybody better watch out because it's going to be the end of the world. Or it could be that the prophets are forthtellers, and they're asking the people of Israel, remember who you used to be, and remember to be on the side of justice. Remember that once you were slaves in Egypt, and so you shouldn't be enslaving people. You're better than this. You're no longer on the side of justice, and you should be. Return to that. Pick up that thread again. So, when people point to these passages and they talk about the day of the Lord and the way that the prophets talk about it, it could be that the world is going to end, or it could be a call to everybody who's reading this, past or present, to say, which side are you on? Are you on the side of justice, or are you furthering the side of injustice? And by the way, this isn't to, try to guilt you or anything like that. This is just to say, look, examine your life. Are you on the side of justice or not? So the bottom line here is that the day of the Lord, or judgment day, or whatever you want to call it, maybe it's not about trying to predict the future and to look into the future and say, oh, this is the day of judgment day. We have it all planned out. It's May 21st. 2011. Maybe instead the Bible talks about the day of the Lord as something that should lead us to present action. Get our house in order. Get ourselves in order. And get us to really think, are we on the side of justice? Are we furthering some sort of positive cause in the world? Are we remembering who we used to be and allowing that to propel us forward in a healthy, life-giving way for the people who are around us? That's what the day of the Lord is like. And that's what it looks like to remember that the day of the Lord is coming. All right, so coming up, we have a couple more of these videos to talk about the verses that people point to when they're trying to talk about the end of the world or a coming judgment day. And what you're going to find, as it is with talking about the prophets, is that it's not about looking to the future and trying to make future predictions. The way that the Bible talks about Judgment Day, the day of the Lord, whatever you want to call it, it's supposed to call us to some sort of present action. So we're going to find all sorts of verses and all sorts of passages that aren't declaring the end is near, so get ready. Instead, they declare a new beginning is here. Do you want to be a part of it? Do you want to be a part of the party? All right. So that's it for this week. I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. Click like and subscribe. Hit the bell so that you know when a new video is posted here on the channel. And I'll see you guys on the next video.